A hospital in western North Carolina is now ground zero over whether or not nurses will unionize. National Nurses United, the nation's largest nurses union, is hoping for a victory when the vote tally is announced in mid-September. But if the union succeeds, it could be the start of a rejuvenated union movement in North Carolina. We are, of course, a right-to-work state, and any victory of a union should have folks concerned, according to our next guest. Becky Gray is Senior Vice President with the John Locke Foundation. She has been following this union issue very closely, writing about it at carolinajournal.com. Becky, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Don. It's always a pleasure.
First of all, let's clarify for everyone who's listening, what does it mean to be a right-to-work state, which North Carolina is? Mm-hmm.
Well, the first thing is, we have a long, long tradition of being a right-to-work state. This isn't anything new. This goes back generations, and really it sort of had its origins in the manufacturing that we did and the agribusiness that we did here in North Carolina, with the chicken processing plants, with the furniture industry, with the textile industry, with all of the mills and the mill workers and those kind of things. Always a strong tradition of workers having rights to be able to work as they want to, without the interference of unions. There have been efforts to unionize workers in North Carolina in the private sector for probably as long as we've been a right-to-work state. But North Carolinians have very wisely said no to that, and the reason why is because in those highly unionized states that we see, unemployment is higher, wages tend to be higher, but the cost of everything else goes up as well. And when you have collective bargaining with the public sector workers, then you're talking about your property taxes and taxes going way up as those things escalate. So, we've just seen over the years, and when you compare highly unionized states like New York, New Jersey, Illinois, to low unionized right-to-work states, if you will, North Carolina, South Carolina, we're at either, depending on which way you do that ranking, we're either at the top or the bottom of anti-union, pro-worker status. But another distinction that's important to make with this too is there are public sector collective bargaining, and that's where you have, the North Carolina Association of Educators here in North Carolina. We have seen increased union-like activity. They have referred to themselves as a union over the last several years. Teachers are public employees. That's called collective bargaining. And in North Carolina, collective bargaining is illegal. On the other hand, or another facet of this, is you have unionization within the public's or the private sector, and that's where a private company, workers within a private company would unionize within just that company, and that really is a workers' contract kind of thing. Think of it that way.
So the Western North Carolina situation with
Right.
the hospital there, tell us which category that fits into. And what's happening there?
Okay, that is a private sector unionization movement. What happened on it is the Mission Hospital, which serves the western part of North Carolina, was bought in February of 2019 by a large for-profit hospital company called HCA Healthcare. HCA Healthcare has hospitals around the U.S. and in the U.K., so they are a large operator. They came in and bought Mission Hospital. There are a few of those HCA hospitals that are unionized, that do have a union presence. I think it's maybe, a dozen or so of those hospitals have this National Nurses Union, which is the largest nurses union in the country. So when they bought Mission Hospital, which had never been unionized, and what I know had never thought about it, with that came this movement with some of the nurses, some of the staff there, to join the National Nurses Union. And of course, the National Nurses Union has come in to advocate and to try to organize these nurses to unionize. Now, what we see with this is, and I've learned a lot about labor law and how these things work. I'm certainly not an expert, but the way these things work is there is enough of a petition, enough of the nurses would say, we'd like to consider being a union. And so they send out ballots where the nurses actually vote as to whether or not they want to join the union.
And those ballots are out now.
Those ballots have gone out now. They will be returned by September 16th, or they'll be counted on September 16th. And so we'll know at that point whether or not the majority of the nurses at Mission, now HCA Healthcare, want to be unionized. The issue and the red flag for me was, as we were watching this and seeing some of the news reports and how this was evolving, there were people that were involved in this, and by people I mean the union organizers and some of the nurses who are very pro-union with this were saying our intent is to get a foothold at Mission Hospital, and then we intend to grow and unionize in hospitals all across North Carolina.
So this would essentially be, what's the phrase, the camel's nose under the tent here, if this succeeds. And by no means is this a done deal. There is a group that is opposed to the idea, a group of nurses opposed to the idea of unionizing in their hospital. What are their main arguments against the union effort?
Well, what we've seen with union activity in other states is the unions collect dues from their members, and the premise is those dues will be used to protect their rights and to advocate for them. What we've seen in other states, and historically what we've seen with this, is the union collects dues and then they begin to sponsor very progressive ideas, and so they're very involved politically. Now, we've seen that here in North Carolina. We've seen the influence of union money coming in over the last several elections, and it's like any group that you have. If you're part of a nurses group, you may be neutral politically, or you may be a conservative political leaning nurse. You come in, your dues are used to advocate for very progressive and in many cases just radical ideas that the unions support. And so that's one of the concerns. The other thing is the unions have been rife with corruption, with all kinds of problems that we've seen of using the money not the way that it certainly was intended to be used. And I think that one reason why North Carolina is being targeted is, number one, as you mentioned at the beginning of this, we've always been a right-to-work state. So I think many of us think, well, we're not a union state, and so there's nothing to worry about here. What we've seen over the last several decades is, as people are leaving those highly unionized, highly taxed states and moving to North Carolina, there's a different culture that's begun to move in and to think. Many of these people, we have folks right here on our John Locke Foundation staff who have come from other parts of the country, whose family members were union members over the years. And so, where we in North Carolina, those of us that have been here longer, seem to think, the right to work is what makes sense to us. That's what our culture is. But as we have people moving in from other parts of the country, which, by the way, they're moving to North Carolina not just because of our beautiful coastline and our mountains, but also because of the cost of living and the taxes and, the freedoms and the right to work that we have here. But they're bringing with them that culture of unions are not a big deal. It's always been a part of things. They just accept it. So that's part of what we're seeing with this.